Okay, so yesterday we went over the high-level view and how to install Condor, and now we get to the actual front-end part, including in this talk the installation, and then more detailed configuration and monitoring in the other talks during the day. And finally, we have a talk from Matt about Corral, which is the other kind of front end that you can use. So, just a reminder that the glidings are just regular Condor daemons that are sent as grid jobs, and the glideinWMS is there just to automate them. So there's no magic involved, and so Condor, it's the more important part, but we discussed yesterday how to install it. And another thing to remember is that the front end is the brain of the glideinWMS system, the non-Condor part. In fact, it's really just a slave doing the bidding of the factory. First thing, the gliding startup will get a large fraction of the pieces it needs via the web servers, both from the factory and the front end. So you need a working web server or the front end or nothing to work. So when you will install it, remember you need the web server and it must be running. Again, small reminder about the linearity that each front end can talk to multiple factories and multiple factories can support, each factory can support multiple front ends. So it's end-to-end, and it's unlikely that the factory and the front end operated by the same people, so it can happen. And then we have a two-level matchmaking. So the glideinWMS, impersonated by the front end, does the first matchmaking, decides where to send the gliders. But when the gliders do start, it's the negotiator that does the final assignment of jobs to gliders, which has two implications. One, if the two information are not in sync, you may end up with gliders that never run any job. And the other thing you should remember is the fact that a glide that was submitted for a specific, because of a specific job in the queue may not be there anymore when the gliding starts. But this is fine if that's another job it will take it. So the glidings are not submitted for a specific job, although jobs do trigger the submission of the glidings. But any job there then can run on that glide. Just a short reminder of security handles between the factory and the front end. There is mutual authentication with the factory, so the front end will need to provide a bunch of information to the factory, and the factory will need to whitelist the information. On the other hand, the factory will provide the front end with some information, and the front end will need to whitelist this information. We discussed this a little more detail yesterday, so I will not go again over it, but you will need it when you go to install the front end. Now, a few words about monitoring. The front end itself gives historical statistics for monitoring purposes. They are based essentially on the round-robin databases, which is RRD tool. If you never see it, look at it. Pretty nice tool. And we provide a web interface to the RRDs, which is completely client-side, implemented in pure JavaScript. So there is no server-side code. The web server you have is just serving files, the RRDs. You can actually move it to anywhere. If you have somebody else to host them, you can periodically copy them over or something like that. I know of at least one VO that does it like that. They don't have the web server locally, but they periodically sync it to another web server on database central ID. And this is the product that does the rendering. If you want to look at it, you will need it because we'll need to install a tarball. So, like we did yesterday with Condor, I have two parts. One is the planning and then the actual installation. So, again, a reminder that it's a big world. It's not just the front end. The front end process is just one of the many pieces you need to install in order to make it work. If you install just this, nothing to do. Pretty much good. So we have Condor, and we discussed this in detail yesterday, so I will not go over it because it's a big part. It was worth dedicating on. You will need the web server that will serve. It's nothing major, but you have to have it or it will not work. It may or may not be here. It's easy if it is here, but as I said, you could sync it periodically somewhere else and it will still work. You will need a factory to serve you, unless you are really brave and you want to install your own factory, but that's not part of this topic. We assume there is a factory somewhere to serve you. And then you have the grid, which is widespread and will actually provide a source somehow. And we have to play nicely with all of them in order to make the system work. Yes?
Would it be any web server, or you
Any web server. As long as it can serve static files, that's...
So you're not using Apache server-side includes or mods or anything?
No, actually the installer disables everything but file serving. And yeah, you can use anything. Absolutely no server-side code. So Condor is the most important part, and you should at least know how to install it if you haven't installed it yet. So I'll skip over this. So let's plan for everything else. The front end can be installed on its own node or shared with others, but avoid nodes that have many users that can log in into them. For security reasons, because you will have all the pilot proxies there. So if the machine is compromised, you don't want the pilot proxy compromised. And having interactive users is a good way to get your machine compromised. So not getting them is a good idea. So a good candidate is the Condor Central Manager. If you have enough hardware to run both, of course. This is for example, CMS has been switching between dedicated and collocating with the Central Manager as our needs and hardware came up and down. So that's definitely a good place to put it. Now, what will you need? Well, from hardware point of view, you will need a decent amount of CPU and memory. It really depends on how big you are, because it scales with the number of jobs in the Condor queues, pretty much. You will need 1 kilobyte to 100 kilobytes per job in the job queue, in the Condor queues, per job. And the actual amount depends a lot on what attributes you use for matchmaking. So if you use big attributes for matchmaking, it will use a lot. If you essentially have a matchmaking of true, it will use very, very little, essentially a few hundreds of bytes. And it will also scale with the number of glidings you have registered with the collector. And again, depends what attributes you use there for matchmaking. Essentially, the memory scales with the amount of attributes it has to keep it in memory when it does the matchmaking. So it's not huge, but if you have a lot of jobs or you use really long attributes, it can add up pretty much. The front end will its forks, essentially forks and spans and strings, banks and strings. It will use up to 5 processes. So if you have multiple CPUs, it will be able to use them. And it has minimal IOUs. So it can be in the virtual machine for those who like virtual machines. IO is not a big deal. So it's another good reason to collocate it with the central manager. So the front end, you should definitely install the front end as non-root because it doesn't need to be root, it doesn't have a reason to be root. And you can install everything as non-root. However, there are a few components that are just easier to install throughout simply the way they are provided by the software providers. The OSG grid client and the CAs, like we said yesterday, OSG has moved to RPMs. So if you want to use OSG provided grid software, you will have to install it as well. There is, moving forward, there is no alternative. The web server, usually it's easier just to do a yum install instead of installing it by hand. If you want to install it by hand, feel free to do it. It has some security advantages. I don't know many people that have ever done it. And the RD Python library it's just easier to install them alongside your Python installation. So it's easier to do yum install than install them separately and set all the paths, stuff like that. But you can do it and it will still work. I will just describe it. There is also a frontend RPM available, which I will briefly describe in the end. And this is completely installed as root and needs to be maintained as root. So I don't really like it, but it's what comes from the OSG stack if you want to use the OSG stack instead of going directly to the glideinWMS distribution. So I will describe it briefly because it's OSG supported, but I don't really like it. So we went over the OSG grid client yesterday. I'm pretty much repeating what I had yesterday on the slides, and for those who want to just read this, I will not repeat it right now. I just go over it. And again, you don't need to use the OSG grid client. If you have anything else like EGI, glide grid client, that will work just as fine. For the web server, telling Todd, anything will work. We are just serving static files. Anything that can serve static files using the HTTP protocol will work. If you use the glideinWMS provided installer, it will also clean up the config for you. So it uses the system yum install, so you can then do yum updates later on and it will work. But it will essentially exclude all the plugins that come standard with Apache and just keep the straight minimum you need to Apache still work. So this allows you to minimize completely any security risk that may come from Apache. Since you don't need it, why not? And it will create, and you will need to create a directory like this, and then make it owned by the frontend user, assuming that the frontend user is what you use to install the frontend. And this is literally how you can use the installer to install the web server. RD tool, this is the famous round-robin databases. So we use the Python libraries for RD tool, which are standard with most web OSs. If you use Red Hat 5, you just need to use Apple, which if you install the OSG client, you already have, because that was required. And just yum install RD tool Python, done. And that will get it into your system, and you can start using it. And that's all the frontend needs. You can install them from scratch, from source, compile it, put it in the libraries, but it's a pain. And unless you really cannot do yum install, I would really not recommend it. But as I said, you can install everything as non-root, and if you don't have root privileges on the system, you can still do it. It's just more painful, and I will not describe it. No. Okay. So that's what you need to do as root. Everything else should now be possible to do as non-root. Almost. You know that. So before you start the actual installation, you need a few things, and you must decide what user you will be using. And I will assume it's called frontend. It just makes sense. You will need a host or a service certificate for the frontend. This is what the frontend will be using to talk to the factory. You will need at least one pilot certificate, and this pilot certificate must be registered with your VO bombs. because else you will not be able to go to most sites. The two could actually be the same, but I would really recommend that they're different. It just makes easier to monitor and maintain the system. There's no technical reason, it's just convenience and ease of monitoring. You will have to decide what the security name is for your front end, and this you should cross-check with the factory admins that somebody else is not already using it, because this must be globally unique. And find the factory that supports you. And as a hint, Doji factory, which with my other head on I support, is one of those where you're welcome to knock if you haven't already. So, the front-end certificate, I think I explained it yesterday already for Condor, because you needed it for Condor, so essentially just repeated the same thing. You can use the OSG DOE grids way of doing it. Fortunately, you must be rolled because you have to install the OSG client stuff. But if you have other ways, Einstein grid or from CERN, just do it. Any trusted grid certificate will do. Similar for the pilot certificate, but this one should really be a service certificate. And you should use a service name that is as much as possible globally unique and have something of your VO name in it. This is simply because the DN you get after that will say blah 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 slash VO pilot slash the name of the node. And there is really nothing in the DN that is obviously specific to a VO pilot apart from this string. So again, it's not a strict security requirement, but it's nice, being a nice citizen and declare who you are in the DN string, which else can be completely arbitrary in that part. So you just make sure that people know who they are talking to without trying to contact the CA and figure out who they are. Parsing the DNs is very convenient. Be a good citizen and try to make it globally unique with something about your VO in the name. Follow same instructions as before if you use the DOE grids or anything else. And then you have to register with your loans. And I will not explain how to do it because every VO has a different loans. So. And if you want to have multiple pilot certificates, as I said yesterday, it may be useful in certain circumstances. You can pick different security classes if you want to make sure that on the factory they are stored in different UIDs, so they are protected from each other. Right now I don't know of anybody that needs that, but it's an option. The default security class name is frontend, but you can use any arbitrary string as long as you agree on it. You tell it then what the string is to the factories. It's really something that you pick. But frontend is usually a good guess if you don't have special needs. Now, the security name is another piece of information that you have to pick. And this must be globally unique, at least across the factories, because each front end will have unique security name, and it will be used in the security protocol between the factory and the front end. And pick something that is VO something, and you're pretty sure it will be globally unique. This may not be the same as the front end name, which also must be globally unique, because this is what gets in the class adds in the protocol when it talks to the factory. But usually the two are slightly different because the front-end name actually contains some versioning string, because the front-end name is used to create the directory structure when you install it. So a good combination would be, for example, let's pick CDF. CDF knaf as a security name, and then as a frontend name, cdf_knaf underscore v1. The frontend, yes. They don't need to be this closely related, but this is a good practice to follow. At this point, you have all the information you need, and you should contact a factory in order to get you authenticated on the other side. Because factory, even if it is a slave, it still chooses its master. So if you don't, if they don't whitelist you, you will be turned away. So if you want to use the OG factory, you just send an email to that address, and you will need to provide essentially the frontend certificate DN and the security name, and any security classes if you have, as we'll just assume it's frontend. And the factory admins will get you back all the factory information that you will need to actually populate the fields about the factory in your configuration. We'll talk about in a few minutes. So now you have everything you need. You decide where to put it. You hopefully have the hardware available. You got the certificates. You decide the various names. You talk to the factory. Everything is ready to get you going. You just need to get the thing up and start running. So, before actually installing the software, you will need to do a few things. You will need to automate the proxy creation, get access to a control client, install the JavaScript RRD tarball, create a frontend configuration file, instantiate the working tree, and then start the frontend. And this can be all done as the UID you chosen, and I will assume it's frontend throughout this talk. And yeah, I'm assuming that you already have the binaries with glideinWMS as well. So in the previous slides, we said you have to get the certificates, and that may take a while. But now, the certificates cannot be used directly by the frontend. You need to actually convert them into proxies. So the difference between a certificate and a proxy is that the certificate is long-lived. It's usually a year, while the proxy is supposed to be short-lived, of the order of days most. And it is so it is almost secure to transfer the proxy somewhere else, while the certificate you never want to leave your machine, just too long-lived, too much of a risk to move it anywhere else. This is why we always use proxies when you go remotely. So you need to create both the service proxy and the pilot proxy out of the service cert and the pilot cert. And the pilot proxy will need to be done with bones proxy in it, and you can use grid proxy in it here because there is no need of bones extensions. How you do it, I will not prescribe anything. In CMS we just use cron tab. Essentially I have a small script that essentially does bones proxy in it every 4 hours. You can use my proxy if that's something that you like. I know that a lot of CMS, a lot of WSG community is crazy about my proxies. I'm not. But anything that keeps a proxy valid while still keeping the certificate secure will work. Oh, and the pilot proxies must be longer than the gliding lifetime. So if you expect to run gliding, have gliding there valid for 72 hours, make at least an 80-hour proxy, or you're pretty much guaranteed that your glidings will be shorter than that. The plus of 8 is just you take wait in the queue before they start. And there is a hard cutoff at 12 hours in the gliding, so never let them go below 12 hours, or gliders will not start. We may change the default at one point, but that's what it is right So here's an example from cron script if you want to just copy and paste and don't want to write your own. Nothing fancy. You just say, well, I actually use one proxy for close. This one is without the const role, without. Create the service certificate, create the service proxy, the pilot proxy, add it to the cron tab. Done. That's all it takes to have something that renews with a cron. But you can get as fancy as you like. So the frontend actually uses a contour client to talk to the schedules, the collectors, both your own and the factory one. So you need the contour binaries in order for the frontend to work. So you need to install them. Unless your frontend is a submit node, which is not recommended, as I said, you will need to install your personal version of the contour binaries. I would also recommend to do the proper configuration so that you can actually use from the command line command q contour status and actually get something useful instead of just having the front end do the right thing. The front end creates its own personal configuration, so it's not really strictly necessary. But from management point of view, it just makes sense. So I would really recommend it. And as usual, the provided installer is the easiest way. It's meant to make it easy as much as possible to get the client installed. If you want to do it by hand, you just unpack the tarball, make the configuration so it points to your central manager. Make sure that no daemons are ever started because it's a client. Contour by default starts at least something. And making sure that nothing ever starts, it's important if you want just a client. And put it in the path, essentially. That's all you need. But the installer will do all the fancy stuff, including the GSI setup and stuff like that, which is nice. And here is how we do it. Again, it's very similar to what you have seen yesterday for installing any other contour. Answer a few questions, and it's done. It really follows almost the same procedure. It just changes slightly the configuration so it doesn't start any daemons. Now, those are really just the prerequisites. And now it comes the main step, which is actually creating your front-end config, which is sort of the hard part. Here I explain just the basics, how you want to set up a very minimal front end that will work, but it will probably not do exactly what you want to do something. And to do this, again, the installer will create a nice template for you. Something that is nice, easy, that does the basic stuff, and gets the hard parts out of your life. But again, it will, as I said, this talk is right now about the basic template, and this is what you get out of the installer. Don't expect that after you run the installer, it's ready to be used. It will create you the very basic stuff that, yes, it works if you are really very vanilla and you don't really care much about where you're going, what you're doing. But it's not really something you want to stick with for the long term. It's just a basic template to get the basics right and start from there to modify. So, just a snapshot of the installer. Essentially asks you for a few things. Where have you untarred the JavaScript RLD tarball, essentially? Where do you want to install it? What is your security name? What is your version? And essentially this will become the front-end name. A bunch of information about factory. I think this is all factory, what you get from the factory admins. Then it asks you a bunch of information about how you configure your contour pool, essentially what do you use for your collector TN, where it is located, where do you have the secondary, what the tree of collectors, you can have many if you want, or in this case one. So you see you can actually use a dash. So you don't, if you have 200, you don't have to type it 200 times, you just provide the range. But if you don't have consecutive ranges, you can actually provide as many lines as you need, and with consecutive ranges in each of them. And then, if you are interested in using all the sketches or SAML, you know will not be used for glideinWMS, so don't monitor, save your CPU resources. And finally, you have to provide the match expression, pretty much. And this is what is recommended default. It's actually, it's not printed out, but it suggests to do that. And I just used it to create the basic template so I can use that then to expand on everything else. It asks you where is your pilot proxies. If you want to use glideinWMS, and we discussed in detail yesterday what various options mean. And here it's an optional, so use it. Do you want the grid environment to be exposed to your jobs? Else it will clean it up, so you get a clean environment with no grid craft in it. If your users are not gridified, probably you don't want to expose all the grid environment. You better pre-process the grid environment is something that users expect through the validation scripts or something like that. We'll discuss in a moment. And here it's, do you want to actually use this XML file to immediately instantiate an instance? And unless you are testing, you probably want to say no. So you get the front-end configuration, and then you start with it. So this will just create the configuration file to use as a base to start mocking with it, and actually to get the point that is ready to be used. But for the purpose of this talk, let's say you did that already, and you are ready to start it up. So this is how so what you need to do is to just run the create frontend tool that comes with the glideinWMS, and tell it where to find the XML file, the configuration file, and it will create the working directory for you. The name will be what you said would be the base directory where you want to use, and this is the default, and there's a front stage. And then it will set frontend underscore the frontend name. And the frontend name will set by default in the installer is security names plus the version. And here is the actual printout of what it would look like. So that tells you, okay, I installed the work here. Here are the log files. This is where the web area is. This is where the web area is. Just so you can copy and paste. And now you are ready to start the frontend. You go into work directory, which will be this one. Right? Put it out here. You just cd into it and issue ./frontend startup start, and the frontend will start, and from now on it works on its own. It's init-like, so it has start, stop, just has reconfig, and something that some people don't expect, and it's maybe a little weird, it has historical reasons, but when you do reconfig, you actually have to tell it where the new configuration file is. So if you just say reconfig, it will say, oh, I don't know what to reconfig. So you actually need to point it to the updated configuration file, which is not in the work directory. The work directory you should treat as read-only, and the configuration is somewhere else. Typically in /instance version.config, this is what the installer by default does, but it's just a convention. You could put it anywhere else. If you keep it there, it's just convenience because you are the same as everybody else.
Once you do the reconfig, does it like replace the front end XML that's in the front ender or what?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. Not only, it does a lot of other things, but among other things, it replaces the frontend.xml.
But I don't need to keep this copy that I edited and mess
No.
with. I can.
No, you don't need to.
Okay.
It's
If
usually
I want
convenient.
to reconfig it a month later, I can just take front end XML from the front ender.
You could. Usually it's convenient. So in this directory you have the frontend, the latest frontend XML that you are modifying and it's ready to be reconfigured. All the support files, like the validation scripts, you can all keep here so they're all together. But yeah, you don't need to. Everything is in the work directory and it should be considered redundant. Actually, the frontend will really screw up if you try to modify anything in the work directory by hand. You should always use the reconfig because it changes tens of files at once and they all must be in sync. Or nothing will work. As promised, a few words about how to install it from the RPM. Again, I don't like it, but I will tell you.
You'll say why you don't like it.
You have to install it as root, which is the first thing that I don't like. I think that if something doesn't need to be installed as root, it should not be, especially if it's a daemon. And this is a daemon, it needs to be installed and maintained by root. So personally, it's against my philosophy, but if people like it, feel free to do it, it works. So the advantages of doing it as an RPM is that it's tightly integrated with the system. You cannot have two versions installed at once. It's like an RPM. You can have one and one only. It comes partially pre-configured to talk to the OSG factory. But on the other hand, disadvantage, it's an RPM. So it must be installed by and maintained as root, and you cannot have two of them. For example, in CMS, we are running 3 different front ends in parallel installed with the installer. I would never be able to do it with RPMs. You can have one and one only. There is no support for versioning, so no way to run two at once. And while it's partially pre-configured to talk to the OSG factory, it requires a lot of other manual configuration for other stuff. So it's actually harder to install than the other one. At least to configure. The basic installation is pretty easy, but then you can configure it slightly more. It's similar to the OSG grid client with all the Apple stuff and stuff like that. And indeed, I would assume you install the OSG client first because it tightly connects to it, and it actually gets quite a few pieces from it. It will require an RPS-based Condor installation. It must come from the OSG repository. There's no way to install it any other way. It will not work with any other way. You have to install it that way. If you have your Condor installed any other way, forget about it. It will not work. You will not be able to type. It provides some basic Condor configuration files that sit here, which is the new Condor way of doing it, especially with RPMs. And I will not describe it more what you need to do in the wiki. It actually tells you exactly what to do, but it's similar to what I described yesterday in Condor installation. Quick here, quick there. And actually, RPM installation is trivial. It's yum install glideinWMS, pure frontend, boom, comes down. But you still have to configure. You get the basic frontend.xml that's a slightly less user-friendly version of what you get from the installer. The less user-friendly part is that instead of being asked for the fields that you then be put in the XML file, you have to go in it and it says replace here, replace here, replace here, replace here, and you have to, with the editor, replace the right fields in the right places. You can essentially what needs to be modified is the security sections. How to talk to the rest of the Condor pool, where are the center managers, where are the submit nodes. As I said, instead of being asked, you have to do it yourself. How to interact with the factory. Same questions you will be asked in the installer, you will have to modify them by hand here. And all the information about the service and the pilot proxies. So you get the XML file. So if you prefer to edit XML files instead of Q&A, it's essentially the same information that you have to put in, just in different form. Once the configuration is done, and you'll probably want to do more than just the basics, and we'll discuss in a moment what is more than the basics. It has something similar to the gliding startup, to the frontend startup in the other section, but it's called etc init GWMS dash frontend. Pretty much the same script, just in a different location. Yeah, it uses that configuration file, so you have to modify that configuration file. That's the equivalent of what you had in the instance underscore v10.cfg. This is the XML file that will be used at each reconfig. And another thing, the first time you do a reconfig, so you cannot start the factory without reconfiguring it at least once. And the first time we just complain about it, ignore the complaints. The further reconfigs will not complain anymore. So the first reconfig is really when you configure it the first time. Even it is called reconfig. And at that point you are ready to start it. GWMS for that stuff. So it's very similar to the other one with just small minor changes, and it has to be done as root. While the other, you never need to log in as root once you install it. And this is all I have for the installation.